Good morning. I have a special history treat for you today. This is Wednesdays with Willa, and this is my weekly podcast show that airs on Wednesday mornings at 10 a.m. Eastern on my Facebook page, Willa White Medium. This also goes out on the Lilydale Assembly Facebook page and is eventually uploaded to my YouTube channel where you can find it there as well. And this is year 8 of Wednesdays with Willa show. So year 8 of episodes that we're entering into. If you want to look back on the archive videos, I have had so many great guests and wonderful topics over the years, so you can binge to your heart's content a lot of educational material relating to spiritualism, mediumship, healing, faith, family, and more. And I have a wonderful special guest with us here today. I want to introduce you to Tracy Murphy. Thanks for being on the show today, Tracy.
Oh, thank you for having me yet again.
Yes. And this is part of the Fox family series. We did part 1. And now this is part 2. And for those of you who don't know who Tracy Murphy is, she is a wonderful woman to know because she is the caretaker and historian of the Fox property, also known as the Hydesville Memorial Park, which is central to the beginnings of modern spiritualism. And she's been on my show several times before because we love the history of spiritualism, so we couldn't do it without Tracy. So in the Fox family series, we did part 1, and that focused on Kate and Maggie Fox. And there are other members of the Fox family that were central to the story, and also, things that happen behind the scenes in the family dynamics. So I do encourage you to look back at part 1 of this Fox family series, as well as the other shows that I've done with Tracy on the history. But today we're focused on David Fox, and he is the brother of the famous duo. So we're going to go ahead and get right on into it, Tracy.
Oh, David.
Because for people who don't know the Kate and Maggie Fox story, I mean, that started in March 31st, 1848. And they had the wrappings and they had the contact, and it really shook up the family and the neighborhood and the nation and the world. But people are not so well, it's not so well known, the other aspects of the family, because so much of the heat was on
the girl.
On the girl.
Absolutely. And I also, I like to remind people that when Margaret and John Fox had their children, they had 5 children before Kate and Maggie. And a lot of people don't realize that. And David was the last of that first set. He was their only son. Very interesting young man. He basically was I think he was like a father figure to the girls, because their father, John, he was there, but he was kind of distant. He had like one goal, and that goal was to build their family home. And that was really why they were in Hydesville. They were going to build this family home, and it was literally on the foothills of David's land. Poor John, he did eventually complete this home, although you would be very hard pressed to find anything from this home now. But David had a very, I say, essential role that a lot of people didn't realize, because when you read the information, you just kind of skim over it. Mm-hmm. And I did it 100 times, skimmed over it. And then one day I was like, wait a minute. And I went back and reread the information, and I was like, he was very instrumental in the communication with the peddler. And it was really interesting. There is probably about a 20-year difference between him and Maggie. So just to kind of give you some context of the age difference. He was already living in Hydesville. He had his homestead. He was married to a local girl. Her name was Elizabeth Culver. They say that Elizabeth was wonderful and, beautiful and very kind, very much like David. And I try to think, like, who do I know that I can compare David to? And I can't. He was a very unique, stoic individual. We know that he was religious. He was a Methodist, and he really believed in his religion. Back then it was a part of your life. It was, like a second, third arm. And that was how it was for David. They lived right on Parker Road. Actually, the house is still there. I have been lucky enough to become friends with the people that lived there. So I have been in there several times, of course. Those poor people in the beginning. I'll save that for later, but gosh. But his house is there, and inside it's very much the same. So it really is like taking a trip back into the 1800s. But David was a farmer by trade. He would have grain fields, peppermint. He also did lavender. So those were kind of the things around Wayne County and in Hydesville that you would typically see being grown. And he just lived this very nice, quiet life. And then he finally convinced his father and his mother to come and enjoy the country life with him. And that's why they chose the foothills, or, down by the Parker Road, for their home, because
they had been living where? They had been living
in Rochester, with
big city.
Yeah, they had been living up there, and it just wasn't what John wanted. Even back then, if you're country folk and they were country folk, you don't want to be in the city. You don't want to hear the noises, and I'm sure the noises are very different now than they were back then. I mean, back then it was a lot of horses and men and women and things like that. But he definitely, he was a blacksmith by trade, but he also farmed. And I think for him, when David said, come live in the country with us, I think that was the solution.
And they were also trying to do a reset after years of having problems with the alcoholism that John, the father, had, and the split that caused between him and his wife. And I can understand why he would want to have a more peaceful life that probably wasn't near the bars or wherever.
Exactly. And you're going to get that in the city. And Hydesville was established. We know that it was well established probably in 1830. So well before they came. And, it was just like they had kind of stayed with David for a little bit, but, they heard about the cottage coming up, or the Hyde's cottage back then, that it was coming up and you could rent it. And David, said, hey, go see if you can rent it. And it just kind of set up the perfect storm.
Do you know how long they were at David's before they got into the rental property?
They were at David's from about April of 1847 until about December.
Okay.
So they were there pretty much from the early spring, so he could start building and doing the foundation, until they couldn't do it anymore. And then the cottage came up, is available, and that's when they all moved in.
And at that point, we have the father, and we have the mother, and we have Katie and Maggie. And was there anyone else that they were having to be concerned about needing to?
Nope, okay. It was just the four of them were living in the cottage. It was David and his wife, and they had some young children.
Right.
He had a couple sons and a couple daughters. More came as he went through the years, which is interesting.
So his house, David's house, was full of his family of what, 5, 6?
It would have been probably him and Elizabeth, and then 3 of the children. So there's 5.
5 there,
4 more,
and then you 4 more. And you've been in that house
I've been in that house,
and it would have been kind of tight.
Very.
Through that. And so then like, hey, go rent the cottage. Do you know how long they were planning to rent the cottage? Or was it just
I think it was going to be indefinitely until his home was finished, and he had hoped to be done in 48, which, I mean, he did get a little sidetracked, but he did eventually finish it. Unfortunately, Margaret, Maggie, and Kate never lived in it, which is strange and sad, but that was what happened. We know that when the family moved in, Mrs. Fox was a little uneasy at first, and she thought that the house was haunted, and didn't say too much. And then with the girls, and then finally all the communication, right before the big breakthrough, David had gone down to the house, and he looked at his mother, and he was just like, "Are you sick?" And she told him, like, "There is something here, and I don't know what we've done to upset, what they thought was, maybe some religious, I don't even know what to call it, but, she just said, "I don't know what we've done to have this fall on us. Like, what did we do?" And, she would explain to him, like, "We're hearing these noises, and, it's happening every night, and we're so tired, but we can't figure it out." And he just basically, being the son, was like, "Oh, mother, don't worry. And whatever it is, it's going to be a simple explanation." He's probably thinking it's raccoons in the attic. I don't know what he was thinking. And she's just like, "I'm telling you, there's something going on." And he just tried to console her, and just left it at that.
Well, she tended to get kind of head up about things anyway. So
she did.
Yeah, it was her personality.
I mean, a lot of people think, that they didn't have any mediumship or any gift, but they did, and you didn't talk about it. It was really forbidden, because back then you were either good or you were bad. You were either in the church or you're going to hell. And that's the way it was. And so, you didn't sit there and say, "Geez, I think this place is haunted," or "I think we're seeing spirits." Like, her husband, if John had been devout, or I don't want to say a fanatic, but he could have said, "My wife is crazy and she needs to be locked up."
Right.
And that's the reality of the 1800s. I mean, women didn't have a voice. So if you're going to speak, you better make sure what you say is very well thought out. And, you don't go around saying, "Well, I think I'm seeing ghosts," because you're going to go.
She's confiding in David. She's,
absolutely
venting to him her fears.
Yep.
And he's like, there, Mom.
It's okay.
He seems like such a chill guy. Like, his personality, he's pretty
chill. Very, in today's words, chill. He was very chill. There wasn't a lot that rattled him. He was, they say that Mrs. Fox was very calm and had this calm dignity about her. David was very much her son. He was very calm, and everything had an answer, and there was a reason, and we're going to figure it out. Don't worry, but don't go telling people, because then they're going to think you're nuts. Mm-hmm. So it was that balance that I think it reassured her, but also she was thinking, like, I don't know, something's not right. So we all fast forward to that night. And she basically said, "We're going to bed early. We're not going to talk about this. Nobody addresses the noises. Ignore them." And we know that they couldn't. They absolutely could not. And after word got out that the girls are now communicating by rapping noises with this unseen spirit. David gets word because he's only 2.5 miles away. So, word spread quickly, especially when Mrs. Fox said, okay, John, go get the neighbors. Make sure they're the smart, sound neighbors, so we know what's going on here. And David finally makes his way down. And it was David who actually said, let's write out the letters of the alphabet and point. And when we get to the letter of your name, the first letter of your name, you rap. And that's how they did it. Someone wrote it all down, and the spirit we now know as Charles Rosna, rapped out his name. And it was David. David said, let's do this. It was David who, when the spirit said, hey, I was murdered in this house and I'm in your cellar, it was David who said, okay, let's go look. And they went down, and of course, the cellar flooded, so they had to wait. But it wasn't something where David would say, oh yeah, okay, we'll wait, and not go back.
Mm-hmm.
They did go back. They went back in April. They went back in July. And July is when they really started finding, the deeper they got. We always tell the kids when we do our dig camp, the deeper you go, the older it is. Mm-hmm. So, at first they were just digging these little 2-foot holes, but they were getting down to like 4 to 6 feet. And that's when they started finding pieces of bone and teeth and reddish hair. So it was, that was all him. It's very interesting because he, at first, I think, when all this started happening, he was kind of like, okay, so we did it. We figured it out, and now it's going to go away. But it didn't. And he insisted that his mother and the girls come stay with him and his family. Mm-hmm. He really wanted them removed. And I think that shows his protective, this is my family. We don't know what's going on, and we have to protect them. And so he moved them all up to his house. Now, John stayed. He stayed in the house, and David would go down and stay with John. And then there were other people who would come and stay as well, because this is still going on. It didn't stop because they left. But now they've transferred it up to David's house. So now the girls are hearing the knocking noises at David's house. And, he's thinking like, are they doing it? Are they making the noises? And that was, and that's what everybody was thinking, like, oh, it's the girls. They're doing it. But they were also hearing it back at the cottage. So, they were kind of going back and forth, like, how is this happening? How is this happening? So I think for a while it was very confusing. They were spending a lot of their nights in the cottage, and they were doing these little dig sites. So they would, say, okay, spirit, are you in this corner? Give 2 raps, and it would be quiet. Are you in this corner? Give 2 raps, and you would hear 2 raps, and they would start to dig. So the whole cellar was dug up.
So are you saying that John and David, they were overseeing this?
The digging,
and they were hearing the raps just the way Katie and Maggie were hearing them and having that experience. And I just want to pause it for a second here. So if I'm hearing you correctly, David and some others were at the cottage. This is all blown up in the newspapers at this point. So they probably feel like they need to stay at the house so that people don't do something.
Yep.
To it.
Because you've got hundreds of people.
Hundreds of people have swarmed their house wanting to know what this is about, rubbernecking.
Not all nice people.
Yeah.
There are some, that are, now you've got the church people that are coming and they're not being so nice. crowds and crowds of people in this little house, just waiting to
Are they trying to get in, or did they let them in during that time, even though they're trying to do the digging? Because I remember reading in the history of spiritualism that various people arrived, and even some Quakers were there, and there were all these people that were also trying to test the communication with the spirit.
Yep. So what ended up happening, I think, for David, is that he started hearing voices. He was getting little whispers in his ear, just like the girls, that basically spirit wanted him to choose specific people, like the Post family.
Isaac Post.
So he would hear a whisper in his head, like, you need to contact so-and-so, so-and-so, and this person, and they need to come down and they need to help you dig. And he wouldn't do it. One, he was like, oh my gosh, I'm hearing voices, I must be insane. But two, he didn't want people to ridicule him. He had a good position in the little hamlet of Hydesville. I mean, he was very well respected in the community. And he felt like if he's listening to these voices and they're saying, oh yeah, you got to get these specific people, named them, and you got to get them to come down because they're going to listen to you,
right,
and get them to dig, then they're going to see this big revelation that we're trying to show you. And he refused to do it. And because of that, they were relentless. These spirit noises were relentless. And I think that's why eventually Mrs. Fox was like, okay, Katie, you're going to go live with your sister, because, I don't know if you're doing it, if Maggie's doing it, or are you doing it together? Because now it's here in David's house.
Right.
And so I think that was one of the main reasons why they split the girls up. And then, of course, Maggie's still living in David's house and it's happening there. And then we know Kate goes up to Leah's house and it's definitely happening there.
So you have 3 locations that this is happening in.
Yeah.
Now, with these different reps that are going on and 3 different locations, are they getting any kind of new information, or is it just keep spelling out the same kind of stuff?
For David, it was interesting because when he would try to go to bed at night instead of going down to dig, it was like the peddler was reenacting the murder scene all over again. God. So he would start hearing, So he would start hearing noises in his home while he's trying to sleep of like a big thud, and then like slicing noises and sawing, reenacting. And it was basically, the girls, their mother told them, you ignore those, the noises, ignore them, because this is bad. This is really bad. And by this time, the church is kind of involved because, she had gone to the church and the church was like, we want nothing to do with you because you've done something to make this happen. So, in her head, this is bad. David's kind of conflicted, like, why is this happening? And why is it happening to me? And, I think it was just like, okay, I'm going to get these guys out of my house and see what happens. And it was happening. And then finally he was like, fine. I'm going to go down to the house. I'm going to ask this person. And it ended up being, I think it was his brother-in-law who had a very high position in the community as well.
So his wife's brother.
Yeah.
Also is in the area. Okay.
Basically, they went in and started digging. And that's when they started finding more evidence. They found, I think, like 2 bones from a hand. They found an ankle bone. And of course they have to call the constable or whoever he was back in that day to come and verify that they were human bones, and they did. But I think for David, it was just like, why is this happening?
Right. Why is this happening? And so just to give us a timeline here, March 31st, 1848 has occurred, and this is the first night where the spirit is really in evidence. Now we're moving forward, and within the first few days, there's a lot happening. The people start to swarm the house, and this all is going on. David says, come up to my house. How soon after the 31st did they start digging, and then when they kind of hit pay dirt, so to speak, with the bones?
So basically, I think it was like April 4th or 5th that they started to dig.
Okay.
And then, of course, with the flooding, because it was spring, with the flooding of the basement, that wasn't going to happen. Mm-hmm. And so they basically were like, okay, we got to wait. So they tried, but then they had to wait until summer. And they say that it was a very dry summer that year. So the creek that runs alongside the property was barely running. And I think that helped them. But I think it was July of 48 when they actually started finding some bones.
So by then, had the crowds kind of dispersed a bit more? People are starting to maybe leave go about it, or is there still a lot of interest?
Yes and no. I think because now the girls are pretty much up in Rochester. Mm-hmm. So I think, the newness of, these little girls are talking to spirits has now kind of shifted up into the city. But you still had people in the community that were like, okay, so why are these guys still digging in the basement?
Right.
You would still get people, right, that would show up. And they say, like, the women, the wives of the husbands that were digging were very protective of what was going on. Sure. And so when they were in the basement digging, the women would kind of stand around the house and guard, the men, because people were showing up and they were like, oh, this is bad, it's evil, it's wicked. And, they would throw rocks and oh yeah, I mean, they were getting some good vibrations, but not so good vibrations. Right. And, and everybody was still curious because, well, why is this still going on? Like, it shouldn't be going on. If it was just the spirit, why didn't he move on, with the girls? Mm-hmm. So I think that had a lot to do with it.
Now, did the community know that David had been feeling the spirit contact as well? Or did he keep that hush?
I think for David, he kind of kept it under wraps.
Mm-hmm. Different wraps.
Yeah, exactly. Right. With a W. He really, I think he was very conflicted. I feel like he just didn't know, like he was being told one thing, right? But I think he was pulled to do another. Mm-hmm. And he would check in on his sisters to make sure they were okay. And of course, they would come when they needed a break. They would come and stay with him. His father is still there building the house. I think John was oblivious. John was kind of like, whatever.
Occasionally I dig. Occasionally I go work on the house.
Yeah. My priority is
But house. David is kind of having to run his own life, run this digging process. But it sounds like it's at night that they're digging?
They were digging at night. And then during the day, they would try to rest. But, if they tried to rest at night, they were hearing these, get up, you got to go, you got to dig. I'm here. This is here.
Well, it is July. It is hot. It's probably easier to dig at night. So I kind of get that common sense wise. Yep. But from what you're telling me, David sounds like he was having the full mediumship experience compared to Katie and Maggie, right? Because he's having the visual, the video playing of all of this in front of him. And, there's that denial of, am I really seeing this? How can this be happening? Right. And of course, I'm wondering because, the poor man probably wasn't sleeping well.
imagine he was,
He
yeah.
probably was wondering, am I hallucinating through?
His wife went on record to say that he would pace and pray and pace and pray and pace and pray. And he would say, why, God, what do you want? And then basically, he heard this voice that said, go and do your duty and God will protect you. And I think that's kind of what turned the corner on him, because then he's hearing God will protect me. And you will be rewarded. And I think, he did finally see that, after the bones were discovered and the girls were traveling and they were doing their circles, and, now they're, big time medium stars and all these things are happening. They're getting, questioned and going through the ringer just as much as, well, not as much as he imagined them to be. I mean, they really were being, we all know, being made to stand on tables and crack their joints, so these men could, oh yeah, we know you're cracking your joints because we're going to put our hands on your toes and we're going to feel your ankles and, things like that. I don't think he realized how bad it was for them, because for him, it was just as bad. He just felt like he couldn't show his face in public. He was isolating. And, there was one night, they were all just kind of sitting around the house, and this man rides up the driveway on a horse and says, there's a mob coming. There's a big mob coming and they're coming for you. And
for David?
Yes. So, he's got his wife and, his children and a couple of farm hands, and they literally started gathering rocks to defend the property. They were going to gather rocks. They're running around and they're like, fasten the windows and grab the guns. And David literally, takes one of the guns and the gunpowder and throws it out the window and says, no, God will protect me. And he did.
What happened? How did he protect
me? This mob of people show up.
Yes.
One of the stories that David tells is that there was a woman, because it was men and women, when they got to the house, this woman climbed through one of the windows and was staring at him in the kitchen. And he calmly looked at her and said, if you had knocked at the door, I would have let you in. It wasn't locked. So people were just kind of like, what is going on? And then one of the men said, oh my gosh, David Fox, is that you? And he said, yes, it's me. You know me. I'm a good man. And, I'm sure it didn't hurt that he was standing on his porch with his Bible, but David knew he would be protected. He wasn't doing anything wrong. And so, the crowd was, this man was like, this is David Fox. He's a good man. He's a Christian. He's a, sound mind and body. And what are you doing? What are we doing? And they basically backed off and left him alone. And that was kind of the turn, I think, for David, that, he was like, whew, yeah, they said they were going to protect me, and they did. So this is okay. This is all right. But it wasn't like he was going to go on, he wasn't going on tour. It was like, okay, I'm not crazy, but I'm also not going to advertise that I know that this is happening to me. Done. And that's basically how he lived his life.
Do you know what date that would have been approximately?
I think that was around like 49, 50 that happened.
Oh,
it was years after.
And that's when the mob came to his house?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Why would it
be building? I don't know. I think nowadays we can assemble a mob in what? One sentence? I think back then it probably took them many Sundays to get this mob together, because you're probably on the edge of, oh, I'm a good person, we don't do this. But then you've got other people going, but what he's doing is not right.
Do you know if it was day or night when that happened?
It was evening.
It was evening.
It was evening.
And where is this recorded? Set down.
This is actually in a couple books. One of them is Leah's book about the missing link of spiritualism, and then Time is Kind. And that's the book that David's, oh my goodness, it was his great niece.
Okay.
Married into the family.
Okay.
So she had the family records, and she wrote about this particular incident.
So when you say she had the family records, was there some sort of diary or journal, or what is this?
There were some family journals. And a lot of it was people that were there. So she had talked to the family and the family members that weren't afraid to talk about it.
You mean like his children?
His children, his sisters, Maria and Elizabeth. You couldn't get them to talk about anything that happened. Anything. And David and Maria were close. I think David and Elizabeth were friendly. She wanted nothing to do with any of this. And when you look at some of the historical records and you go back into the ancestry, none of her children are named. She did not put them in the family tree. She didn't want them to have to go through the ridicule.
Right, and the taint of that would be too strong. Yeah.
Right. Maria, I think Maria allowed people to know who she was, and that she was a fox, and yes, they were my sisters, but it wasn't anything that I think she was particularly proud of, in my opinion. It was just kind of like, oh yeah, they were my people.
So David at this time would have been around 30 something?
He would have been probably about 37-ish. Yeah. Yep.
And but he was the youngest of that first batch.
Yes.
So just to kind of orient the family tree, the oldest was.
So Leah at the time probably would have been about 45 years old.
Okay, so she was 45, and then came.
Then it was Elizabeth,
and then Maria,
and then David,
and then skip a bunch of years, and then you finally get.
They had one daughter before Leah that actually died in infancy.
Okay.
And I believe her name was Elizabeth.
Another. Oh, so they tried Elizabeth first. I get it.
Yes, Elizabeth and then Leah.
And then Elizabeth again.
Okay.
Again. Got it.
Names repeat.
Sure.
David actually had a daughter named Leah. They called her Little Leah.
Ah.
Yeah.
And how old were his children approximately during that time?
They were young during this time. Leah wasn't even born yet. So there was Franklin, there was Charles, there was Wilson, and then Leah came along.
Oh, so it was the boys. There were three boys.
Yes. Yeah.
And they would have been how old at that point?
Probably like maybe 4 and 2 and a baby. They were very young.
And so then David's wife Elizabeth was probably off with the kids.
Yes.
Trying to keep everything on set.
She was an interesting person too, because she was very much family driven. Like she basically, she was very comforting, I think, to David in the fact that she didn't think he was crazy. She pretty much went along with everything, that he suggested or was happening or said, oh, we should be doing this. And she would just be like, yeah, you're right. You're right. She never interfered with like his family dynamics.
Yeah.
Like if him and Leah were having an argument, she would just remove herself from the situation. But she also felt like, she was very much part of the family, especially because they were always there. So,
They're always there. But
in.
she has her own family locally too that is backing David up through this circumstance. And I mean, what an awkward time for a farmer for this to hit. And he's having to go dig in the basement for bones when he's supposed to be preparing his land for crops.
Right. And not to mention that when the big mob came, they ran through a lot of those crops. They ruined his crops because there, wagons and horses and people storming with pitchforks and rocks and things like that. They pretty much ruined his crops for that season. So that was a big thing for him, because I didn't do anything wrong. I don't understand what the problem is. Which I'm glad he kind of held that stance. Like I haven't done anything wrong, because I think if he had shown a little bit of weakness or wavered at all, it could have gone the other way.
In the description of him, it just feels like he was kind of Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird. He just has that kind of essence to him.
Yes.
And then, if you look at the picture that I used for the event, he's so good looking.
Right? Yeah. And it was funny because when I first put out that picture, and that picture was given or put out there by a family member. And people were like, that is not David. That's not David Fox, because no farmer dresses that nice. And I'm thinking, you do when you're paying $200 for a portrait. You're going to put on your family best, your Sunday best.
Right.
It's not like he went to church in his overall.
Right.
And people dispute that picture. And I'm just like, okay, whatever. I've learned through the years, I when it comes to stuff like this, people want to know, like, how do you know this stuff? Well, I've been doing it for 25 years. More than that, if you count like my years as a child and a young person, being at the property and learning. But there's just a part of me that, when something pops up and I'm just like, how do I know this? I don't question it anymore, because I feel like there's a part of them that needs for that to be known. And if they're using me, that's great. I'm all for it. And there are times when I look back at my notes and I'm like, why would I write this? Where did I find this? And I think it just comes down to, they want me to know. And
they keep putting it in front of you, the information, and people keep sifting that to you in particular.
I stopped asking why a long time ago. I literally, if people come to the property, I tell them the story about, we had a local spiritualist church. It was Angel Heart Chapel, and our beloved Reverend Lynn, she just passed away a few months ago. But she was getting older and she wanted to retire. And, when you're living in Newark, New York, and you have the only spiritualist church, there aren't a lot of spiritualist ministers or pastors, stepping up to say, yeah, we'll take over. So for us, it was a really hard time, because, your congregation is your family. And I remember going into the enclosure in the property and just kind of sitting down and saying, man, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe this isn't the life for me. Why do churches close? That seems impossible. I need a sign. I need a sign that I need to keep going, that this is the path that I'm on. And, and I remember telling her this, and she was like, oh, Tracy, if a brick falls on your head, you're not going to go, oh, that was a sign to do this. You're going to go, ow, that hurt. A brick just hit me, and it made sense to me. And I was like, you're right. And I just remember going back in, it was probably a couple weeks later, And I would walk around the property and, and just make sure things were good and nothing had fallen. And I looked down, and on the little ledge of the step was the letter K in small stone. And I just looked at it and I was like, I think everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And a part of me always has resonated with Kate. I don't know why. I sometimes feel like Kate. I feel like she's guided me. I've had people tell me like she's been with me. And I just, when I saw that, it was like, oh, I get it. And I was just like, thank you. And I will never, ever ask again. And so I basically,
or at least remember that you had your burning bush and you're good.
Right, well, that was, and I left it. And it was funny because I called my husband and I was like, did you do this? And it was when everybody had those fancy cameras on their flip phone. And I took a picture of it and he was like, why would I do that? And he's like, you're the only one that has a key. It's not like people are getting in there to do that. And I was like, you're right. But then I had that crazy thought, like, did I do this? And then I was like, why would I do this? Did I sleepwalk and walk the 3 miles to the, the enclosure? And but it was like, that was my moment of
you're being guided every step.
That David moment with the whispering and like, you need to stop questioning.
So let's take it back to that story so we can finish that up in completeness then. So the mob has come. The mob has been beaten back by the godliness of this moment. And then what happens after that?
They pretty much disperse. Mm-hmm. And they, believe it or not, and I know it sounds ridiculous because it's way too neat and tidy, but they leave him alone. They leave him alone. They go to him for advice. He just becomes this, I don't know, like this, oh my gosh, you are like, not all knowing, but if we need something, we go to David. Mm-hmm. If something is happening in the congregation, we're going to consult David. Mm-hmm. He just takes on this new persona.
Like a church father.
Yeah, he's like the community grandfather. Yeah. Like anything we want to do, we're going to go talk to David. But no one ever does that again. Nobody ever like publicly ridicules him. They don't, stampede the house. They pretty much leave him alone.
And then in terms of the bones have all been excavated by this point.
Most. Yeah. Well, what they found, what they could find. Yeah.
What they were able to do. The house is kind of standing there in that state because nobody else is going to rent it.
Nobody's living in it. They were the last ones to live in it.
And then, John's working on his house. Yep. The girls are up with Leah in Rochester doing their thing. Yep. And is there any other part of that story that would be important for us to know about David? And
I think for David, I think it changed his life. I think it made him open up just a little bit, mm-hmm. where, things weren't so black and white, so hot or cold. I think before he was right in the middle. Mm-hmm. And, if I step over here, this is bad. If I step over here, it's going to be bad. So I'm going to stay right in the middle. And I think he did become a very neutral part of spiritualism. I think he contributed to spiritualism.
In what way?
I think with the whole alphabet. It wasn't anything new.
Because in the history of spiritualism, it kind of attributes that to the Quakers, to the Isaac Post. But it should be attributed to David, is what you're saying.
I feel like it should, because where does somebody come up with that?
And did he continue to do any of that spirit contact afterward? Is there anything in the family records? Or was that, at what point did the voices stop, perhaps? Or do you think that they stopped as soon as they were done with the digging project? What do you have a sense?
I think for David, once he gave in and said, okay, I'm going to do what you're asking me to do. Just stop. And I think he fulfilled a promise and they fulfilled a promise. So it was
You know, if
basically,
any of his children ended up having any mediumship abilities through.
that's really interesting because they say that, well, one of his children went on to become a doctor. And they say that he was very holistic, that he he could he was a diagnostic, so he could look at someone and say, you have cancer. And just, that was it. You have cancer. You're going to have a heart attack. That type of thing. I don't think it was anything extreme where people were like, oh my gosh, this is crazy, creepy. I think it was just, as a matter of fact, I'm a doctor and I'm going to tell you, you're going to have a heart attack. We know that one of the other sons was a mathematician. He was amazing with numbers. Were they geniuses? I don't know. I don't know. But, I think that's very interesting that they, my father is a farmer, but I'm really good with numbers.
So you're the mathematician, you have a diagnostic doctor, and then what is the third son? He went on to be.
He went on he was a farmer. He went on to have a very quiet life. I think that's what he preferred. Their daughter, Leah, this is the strangest story because, we know that Leah Fox, she had one child, Lizzie. And she, as far as I can find, did not physically have any other children. However, she was always taking David's children. I don't know. And I think because her and David had a very good relationship, but he would literally he would send the boys up there for, a year. And she was very well to do. Her husband had lots of money. So they could afford to give these kids the things that David couldn't, French lessons or whatever. So she really did attribute to their education. By the time she was 6 years old until she was 12.
Wait, you said, wait, you kind of blipped out there. You said something, who was 6 to 12?
Leah,
between ages, and the little Leah, okay.
Yep, little Leah lived with Leah and Daniel for 6 years. She was 6 years old. And, the story basically is that she showed up in her humble country clothes and her braids. And basically, Leah handed her off to the housemaid, and they, scrubbed her and undid her braids and rolled them in curlers and made her a mini version of her aunt.
Oh my goodness gracious.
The poor girl was like, what is happening to me?
She's having a makeover.
A complete makeover. She was taught 2 languages. And she was supposed to speak them. One was in the morning. So at breakfast, she would speak only French. And if she didn't, she got nothing. And then at dinner time, she would speak another language. I believe it was Spanish. And if she didn't, she got nothing. So she was forced into this life, really.
Right.
Only to finally buckle under the pressure and basically say, I'm going home.
Teenagehood had started. She was a tween, right?
Yes.
12, yep. And she's like, I have just been.
I'm done. I don't want to do this with you.
Food and everything.
And ended up going home. And I don't think that, David's sister didn't speak to her for a very long time. Her husband never spoke to her again. They were so angry that we have given you so much. You are so ungrateful. Now you're going back to the country. She went back with David and his wife, and she lived out her life. She married just a regular guy and farmed and had babies.
And was happy.
And was happy, yes.
From that kind of structure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, towards the end of their lives, Leah would come down and she would spend time with David on the porch, and they would have these conversations, and he kind of, she would joke with him and say, didn't you read my book? And he would be, they were in their 70s now, and he would laugh and say, of course I did. I read the first, 10 pages. And she would say, well, okay, then I'm going to go get the book and read it to you. And, so they had that brother-sister relationship. And, I think one of the questions that stands out that he asked her at the very end, right before she died, he said, answer me this question. Were our sisters bad? Were they bad people? And she said, no, there was never anything bad about what we did. And I think for him, it was that, finally I can get that off my heart. He knew when she came for the last time, he just knew that was the last time he was going to see his sister. And it was the last time.
How do you know that particular story?
That was also in her, the missing link. She wrote about it.
Okay.
Wrote about that in her diaries. And it was also spoken about with his great niece had talked about it.
Now, you had said that, I know we need to finish up here soon, but you had said that you've been to David's house.
Yeah.
And can you give us a sense of that place now?
Oh, well, they've changed the outside. It's been in the family for hundreds of years. And they really, you walk into their home and you see the hand-hewn beams that have been there since David and Elizabeth built that house. The basement is very much the same. It's very homey. It's very comfortable. It is not big by any means. You come in, if you come in through the front, you walk into like a great room, but it's not big. It's just what they would refer to as the great room or the family room. The kitchen is right off of it, and then there's another room to the back. There's, I believe, 2 bedrooms upstairs, and then there's like attic space. And it's interesting because when they did renovations to the kitchen, they actually found these little bottles and tonics on the rafters. So at one point, I only can guess that maybe David had indigestion, because I'm pretty sure that's what it was. You mix the powder with the water, and it helped your indigestion. But they actually gave those to me, which was wonderful. But they also, this is so strange, but we went in the attic, and way back in the corner of the attic, resting against the wall, is the lid of a trunk. And it is so cool. And they said, this is not ours. It was found with the house, and here you go. You can keep it. And we don't, we're not saying that it belonged to any peddler or anybody like that, but it was definitely, David or someone's lid. It's really cool. It is really cool. It is metal, and it's fabric, and it's hand painted. It's beautiful. And I have that, and I keep that at the property. But it's just, you walk in, and for me, I walk into the enclosure and I'm like, oh, I'm home. I'm on the property. I'm home. This is great. But David's house felt like home. And it's really nice as the historian part of it to know that they made some changes on the outside, but the inside still remains 1800. It's very much.
So when you say it only had 2 bedrooms, nowadays, like, people have renovated and made their bedrooms bigger. Do you think that it had more bedrooms during David's time?
No, I don't think so.
Seriously, 2 bedrooms.
Yeah, 2 bedrooms. Yeah.
For, as we established, 9 people.
Yep. They would have slept downstairs. You would have put the kids all in one bed. Their mother probably had her own space. But I think all the kids just basically, it was the straw mattresses back then anyway, so you might as well throw them on the floor. But I think a lot of the times they just threw their beds down on the floor, and that's where they slept. And in the morning, you pick it all up and you put it away.
Is there still farmland around David's house, or is that all? Okay.
There's a lot of farmland. A lot of it is, their property that they walk. I've walked the property with them a few times. We're trying to find where John was buried, because John Fox was buried out there.
Okay. The father was buried on that property.
He died in New York City, but he was brought home. And he was buried because he wanted to be buried at home anyway. They don't know where he is. They know that 2 people were buried on the property. One was the baby that Elizabeth and David had. Her name was Ellen. She's buried on the property, and then I'm almost 100% sure that John is out there somewhere. He's the only one I haven't found.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
But Maria, Elizabeth, David, they're all in the Newark Cemetery. And then, of course, the girls, their mom and Leah, they're all in New York City.
In New York City, yes, at that particular cemetery.
Yeah.
Wow. What a story we've been on today. Amazing.
And that's just the iceberg. I mean, I think David had that. He just had that personality where you just wanted to go and hang out with David. So,
Sounds like it.
Yeah, right. Hey, let's hang out on the porch and talk.
Oh, I'm glad that Katie and Maggie and the rest of the Fox family had David to lean on, and even though he did take some of the heat from that experience, it was able to be converted, and he was able to still stay stabilized compared to those girls and what they had to deal with. But it sounds like he stayed very much a family man and a community member, and I'm glad that they had him, especially since John, as we know, didn't have the stability.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, it's funny because I only saw one story where David actually goes into town, and the story is like he goes into town and he goes to a tavern and has a beer and then leaves. So, it's like, it must have been a tough day.
Must have been a tough day on that one.
That was a trek to get into town back then. And, and it just, he remembers like going by the house and thinking, oh, there's the spook house. And, disdain. Right. I don't think it was disdain. It was just kind of like, oh, the memory.
Oh, the memory. Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing about David's story today. I think it's really opened up for the idea of the family dynamics, and there's so much more to the Fox family story than just Katie and Maggie. And I know we've talked, we're going to continue this series with some other family members. So you guys who are in our viewing audience today, please know that there'll be more to come, more great stories from history. And if anybody needs to connect with Tracy, how should they do that?
They can get a hold of me on Facebook. It's pretty simple. I have several pages. You can get a hold of me on the Fox Sisters page or the Hydesville group, or you can email me at foxsisters1848 at Gmail. You can catch me there. We are winding down for our winter hours, so the property goes to sleep starting November 1st. You can walk the property. That's absolutely wonderful. I'm glad people still like doing it. You can peek in the windows, but the enclosure is going to be closed from November to March. I am happy to pop in and give a story here and there. So, we're just, we'll be back in March. We like to give everybody a break, give the enclosure a break.
Right. And it's winter and you get a lot of snow, and it's just not feasible to be dealing with
Yeah.
those kinds of visitors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not to say that if somebody, if you call me, on a Saturday morning and say, hey, I'm coming next weekend, as long as it's not snowing, I'll show up. I don't have a problem.
But please give Tracy advance notice.
Yes.
Because she works and she's got other things on her plate. So we want to honor her time and appreciate what she continues to do as the caretaker and historian of the Fox sisters' property. And we're so grateful for the work that you've done over the years and for coming on Wednesdays with Willa again.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, we'll definitely be having you back again because we're going to continue our Fox Family series. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. Please join me next week for another great Wednesdays with Willa show. Same time, same place, 10 a.m. Eastern on my Facebook page on Wednesdays. So Willa White Medium, and also on the Lilydale Assembly page. All right, everyone, have a fantastic day and God bless. Bye-bye.